Hey guys, good morning. I'm having my morning coffee. It's the weekend. I usually sleep in on the weekend. And I wasn't planning on making a video, but something's happened that I think has gone a little bit under the radar, which is really significant in the trade war between Canada and the United States. And I thought I'd do this video, okay? And I'm just gonna tell you what's happened, and then we'll discuss it a little bit. But basically the headline is, "Don't mess with Alaska." And that's from Alaskan Senator Dan Sullivan has warned British Columbia, don't mess with Alaska. So why did he say that? Let me give you the picture here. The Premier of British Columbia, a province in Canada on the west coast, is attempting to pass a law which would give him extraordinary powers. Okay, I'm not going to get into the details, but and then he gave a speech and he said that one of the powers would be, and he's threatening to do this, is to charge a toll on Americans that want to drive from the main United States to Alaska. As you know, the Alaska Highway travels through Canada, mainly through British Columbia, and connects the United States and Alaska. So the Premier of BC threatened this. And he would be able to do that if he passes this law, which would give him sweeping powers where he could just say, okay, we're going to charge a toll to all of these Americans that are, and this is to escalate and to threaten the United States because we're having this trade war, okay? And I've said before in a previous video, one of the ways you can kind of measure how intelligent someone is when they say something, how much have they thought, well, what would happen next, okay? And let's just say politicians are not typically smart people, okay? The job of a politician is to kind of garner public support and be kind of a cheerleader, or the best politicians are like actors and salesmen. Politicians love to use inflammatory rhetoric to become more popular and get the population on their side because they rely on votes, all right? But anyways, what could happen next? So the Premier of BC threatened that he's going to impose tolls on Americans traveling to Alaska. Now, what could that be? Like charge them $5, $10 as a toll to drive to Alaska? How many people drive from the U.S. to Alaska at any given month? Like, I don't know, like 100, 500, 10? So, you know, $5, $10 times a few hundred vehicles. This is what he's talking about, right? Launching a threat, which immediately got a reply from the governor of Alaska. And what he said, I'll find it here, Canada, you don't want to mess with Alaska. And if you do, we are going to work hard on having our cruise ships bypass your ports. So how would he do this, the governor of Alaska? He said, he elaborated, I don't know the premiers of the different provinces, but it's a bit of a dangerous game for them. So he said he is going to launch into the desire to repeal, either through the Senate or by executive order from the president, something called the Passenger Vessel Act. So under this Passenger Vessel Service Act, which is the law that governs shipping now, it's in place right now, this is what it says, foreign-built ships, so ships that are not built in the U.S., are not allowed to carry passengers between two U.S. ports without a stopover in a foreign country. That's what, I don't know why it says this. I don't know what the reason is for this act, but that's the act. And the result of that is that all of the cruises that go to Alaska, that stop in Alaskan destinations, if it is a foreign cruise ship, there's many foreign cruise ship lines. It's a huge part of the West Coast tourism economy. Those ships have to stop in a foreign port. Now, what would be a foreign port along the West Coast, close to Alaska? Well, British Columbia. So those ships stop in mainly Vancouver. Sometimes they stop in Nanaimo. And those are probably the two main ones, okay? So you have many Alaskan cruises that start up in Alaska and work their way down and end in Vancouver, or start in Vancouver and go their way up and end in Alaska. And I know this because I just took one, all right? And it was a beautiful cruise. I did it last year. But now the Alaskan governor is saying, well, he's gonna pursue repealing this act. And why would he do that? Because now if they repeal that act, there is no legal obligation to stop in a foreign port. So going forward, if he succeeds in repealing this act, all it would take is an executive order from the president to repeal this. The president just has to get out his Sharpie, sign a piece of paper and say, well, that's a stupid law, it's repealed. And going forward, West Coast cruises could start in Alaska, work their way down, and when they get to the end, instead of stopping in Vancouver, they stop in Seattle. And they could, instead of starting in Vancouver, they could start in Seattle and cut Canada, British Columbia off completely. So what's happened is, just by uttering the threat, this BC premier, just by threatening this, has launched the governor of Alaska to go full speed and do this. And he may have jeopardized hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of tourism for his own province, could evaporate within a year. And all this because he threatened a toll on Americans wanting to drive from, say, Montana to Alaska. At $5 or $10 per car times a few thousand cars. He put BC's tourism cruise industry at risk. And whether this trade war escalates or gets settled, this Passenger Vessel Service Act has a high chance of being repealed or revised so that the U.S. is no longer obligated, or cruise ships are no longer obligated to stop in a foreign country, and could cut off Canada completely from cruises on the West Coast. So imagine this, guys. Imagine the brain power that is involved here. And we have to step back a little bit, because I know that inflammatory rhetoric and national pride and emotion has a lot to do with things here, right? And as I said, politicians need to garner that support, and they love to be popular, and they use every excuse they can to try and they make a statement and then they go check the polls. What happened? How many likes did I get on Facebook? Have my numbers gone up? It's a politician, right? But you have to put it in perspective, because we're in this trade battle between the United States and Canada now. And the two federal governments have, the US has launched tariffs against Canada federally. The federal government in Canada has responded with tariffs against the United States. And in the background, there's negotiations and there's diplomats talking about this stuff and trying to figure out what to do, right? The two federal governments, ours being very weak because we don't really have a leader that has a mandate. We still have to have an election. And the American president, very strong, because he's just been elected, right? And he controls the House and the Senate and the presidency. And so these two entities are going at it. And because in Canada, our federal leadership is weak, we have 10 other leaders, provincial leaders. Every now and then, one of them wants to be Captain Canada and launch a new threat. And you have to understand that there's been no state, none of the 50 states in the United States have independently launched a threat against Canada. The US federal government has done this. But in Canada now, we have individual provinces launching threats against the US, with wide-ranging support from Canadians, right? This is a huge issue in Canada. Most Canadians, probably 80, 90% are going to go, yeah, right on. Let's charge them a tariff when they, if they want to drive up to Alaska, let's charge them. It's an emotional thing, but it's not really a smart thing. And just as an example, it was last week when Captain Canada from Ontario threatened to cut off electricity to New York and a few other states. And he threatened to cut off electricity, and he made a big deal of it, and he says, I'll cut off the electricity with a smile on my face, and I will be relentless, and I will never back down. He said that, right? He said that on US television. And all it took was one social media post and one phone call, and then he immediately backed down, and he was no longer relentless. And I'm going to read this because people get caught up in the emotion, and they get caught up as if you're cheering for a team in a hockey game or a football game. But it's a lot more serious than that. Okay, so no comedy now. Let me just read you. After Doug Ford threatened to cut off electricity, the President of the United States he released this statement. I'm just going to read one sentence from it, okay? It's from the President of the United States in response to Doug Ford wanting to cut off electricity. He said, "I will shortly be declaring a national emergency on electricity within the threatened area. This will allow the U.S. to quickly do what has to be done to alleviate this abusive threat from Canada." Now, if you think about that, okay, that's very serious. Then Doug Ford received one 15-minute phone call and he backed down. I'll tell you do whatever is necessary to alleviate this threat is. I'm sure on that phone call, the U.S. Trade negotiator mentioned to Doug Ford that, hey, Ontario receives almost all of its oil, refined gasoline, from the U.S. Ontario and Quebec, for that matter, do not receive oil, do not get their oil from Canadian sources, which would be Alberta. Almost all the oil that Alberta produces is shipped down through pipeline into the United States. It's refined, and then it's shipped back up and to Ontario and Quebec as refined fuel. You launch a threat, I'll cut off your electricity to a million homes in the U.S., and I think that represented about $400,000 a day in revenue if Doug Ford implemented a 25% tax on electricity exports to the U.S. The U.S. could respond by, okay, cutting off your fuel, cutting off oil exports to Canada for 20 million people in Ontario, Quebec. And they probably wouldn't hesitate to do it. So now, Captain Canada, Doug Ford, backed down immediately. But Captain Canada, Mr. Eby from BC, thought, well, it's time for me to be Captain Canada, and I'm going to threaten the U.S. Imagine threatening, I'm going to toll your people for driving across my province. What? If you're watching a football game, it's like someone taking a cheap shot and you go, yeah! Or a hockey game, yeah, hit him! But this isn't a hockey game, and it's not, it's a lot more serious than that, and it's going to have serious ramifications. The Premier of British Columbia may have inadvertently poked the bear in Alaska, and if they repeal this law, this shipping law, it could change the tourism industry and the cruise ship industry going forward forever on the West Coast. And if it's more advantageous for cruise ships to stop in Seattle as opposed to Vancouver, if there's a cruise from Alaska, they'll just cut the port of Vancouver out. They'll cut the port of Nanaimo. And that'll crush hundreds of millions of dollars from the tourism industry in British Columbia. So just a bonehead move. And it's the kind of thing that we don't need now, right? Like I said, there's a trade war going on. After Captain Canada, Doug Ford, backed down, there were meetings in Washington between the U.S. Trade negotiator and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada, and Doug Ford tagged along. And they had what they called a very positive meeting. And they're discussing the issues that need to be resolved so that this trade war could de-escalate. So that's good. But Premier BC, Captain Canada, gets up there and says, well, I'm going to apply a toll to Americans driving across the province. What could happen next? And what it does is it plays into the hands of the Americans, right? When a bonehead premier does this, an American governor of Alaska can then he's going to use his. He's trying to gather public support for himself because he's a politician, and he's going to paint the Canadians as a threat. He said, well, we can't stand for this. We're going to shut down your cruise. Look, what do you think's going to happen? It's just going to escalate. And what we need now, we don't need escalation, and we don't need 10 Captain Canadas launching separate trade wars on the United States. We need one strong federal leader. We need to have an election and have one, whoever it is, whether it's a conservative or a liberal, whoever wins the election needs to have a mandate so that they can negotiate with the U.S. administration. We don't need 10 Captain Canadas every time something seems to be kind of balanced and maybe cooling off a bit to launch, Captain Canada to the rescue. We're gonna charge Americans for driving across the province. We're gonna charge them $7 Canadian per car to drive to Alaska. How is that in a trade partnership worth $1 trillion a year? You have a premier threatening to charge people driving $7. What's that going to do? What's the point of that other than just wanting to stand in front of the cameras and look, I'm a tough dude. Hey, I'm going to post it on Facebook and see if I get more than 500 likes. We need some smart people in charge, okay? And politicians, like I said, politicians are not smart. It is not a prerequisite to be smart, to be successful in politics. And this goes for on all sides, everywhere. The skill set that a politician needs is the ability to garner public support, to be like a salesman, to be a good actor, to make people like them. And if they have to use inflammatory rhetoric to rally the troops, that's what a successful politician is these days. It's very sad. The smart people are in the background doing the negotiations in rooms, in closed door rooms where they sit and talk about this stuff and come up with the solution, all right? And we need those people. We need to have some smart people in a few rooms, lock them in there, give them some food, and let them discuss things and figure out what the hell's going on and come up with a solution, rather than having people launch off into threatening each other. Every few days there's a new threat. I think it's just not a good way to move forward. So hopefully we get past this I threaten you, you threaten me period of this, I guess you'd call it a crisis, and cooler heads prevail and we can actually have some intelligent dialogue between the two countries. So we'll see if that happens. But I think this one's went a little bit under the radar. If you're an American viewer, did you even know that this has happened? You probably haven't. And if you're an American viewer, you'd probably say, damn right, the Alaskans should shut off those cruise ships. You have national pride. You're gonna support your guy. The people in BC are going to go, damn right, we should charge them a toll. But guys, you're going to sit down and just think about what the hell is going on. Like, to what end are we doing this? These threats are stupid. Okay, we need to calm down. Everyone needs to just take a deep breath and calm down. I didn't want to make a video on that. This is Saturday morning. I was just going to sit here and have 3 cups of coffee calmly. And I made the mistake of opening my laptop and just reading the headlines, right? And what do you do when you read the headline that says, "Don't mess with Alaska," U.S. Senator warns BC? Do we need that now? Is that what we need? Anyways, guys, it's a little frustrating. And I know, there's going to be emotion and pick sides as if we're playing a hockey game, but we're not playing a hockey game, okay? There's real consequences for real people and jobs and livelihoods. And I'm retired. I make YouTube videos. I could say I don't give a shit, right? But there's millions and millions of people that are going to get affected by this. And I don't want Americans to be worried that they won't be able to drive to Alaska, or people working in the hospitality in Vancouver and Nanaimo saying, well, the cruise ships aren't coming anymore. I'm going to get laid off. It's ridiculous. anyways, guys, I thought I'd do this update. Leave some comments. Give me a thumbs up or subscribe if you like my updates. You're getting a little bit of a different perspective, right? Because I know this in the United States, this is probably one of 15 issues. Maybe it ranks number 14 of the 15 things that are going on in your country. But in Canada, this is like number 1 issue. That's all anyone's talking about in Canada. And I think emotions are getting spiraling out of control in our country. With that's the truth, right? That's not my opinion. It's taking over our national discourse. It's gonna be the central topic in our election. How tough can we be versus the Americans? That's going to be the central issue in the election that we're going to have probably in the next 2-3 weeks. There's going to be an election in Canada. So I've talked long enough. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you on the next one.